Welcome to episode 3 of the Bear Market Brief podcast. I'm your host Aaron, and today we're going to be drilling down, so to speak, into Russia, oil, and global energy markets. Our conversation stretches everywhere from the Middle East to the far frigid reaches of Siberia. Joining us today is Rauf Mammadov. Rauf is a resident scholar on energy policy at the Middle East Institute here in Washington. He focuses on issues of energy security, global energy industry trends, as well as energy relations between the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Caucasus. Before joining the Middle East Institute, Mammadov had a 10-year career with SOCAR, that's Azerbaijan's state energy company. We had a great conversation, and we hope you enjoy. So let's dive straight into business here. We're at a very interesting time for the global oil market. Currently, Urals, looking at the latest mark, is at about $18.45, which is not unprecedented, but that evokes the early days of the Putin administration. So tell us, what's going on with the oil market?
Well, it's a phenomenal time. Of course, there's a tragic part of it, but for the oil and gas industry overall, it's a paradigm shifting period. Let me give you some background about what's happening so that we're clear about what's happening now. The market has already been, the oil market has already been oversupplied for last 5 years. So this oversupply problem or malady, it has become a chronic disease in the market. What happened with the COVID was not only it dipped the demand for the oil, it also plummeted the consumption, which are two different notions to understand. Demand is more of a long-term perspective, mid to long-term perspective, whereas consumption is what's happening now in real time. And that brought us to a situation where we saw negative oil prices, WTI prices. I think that was unprecedented. And we've seen, when it comes to Brent oil, which is international benchmark as well, or Urals, what Russia is selling, the prices is below $20, and there is a risk that it will go to single digits. Now, in order to understand the breakdown of what actually impacting the oil prices, was it only COVID? Was it only pandemic, or was it was there other elements in it as well? Well, as I said, the demand was already weakened. As you remember, for last 3-4 years, we have been in a market where price is regulated by a cartel, which is a new version of OPEC called OPEC Plus. It's basically 22 nations of OPEC plus 11 countries led by Russia. And the market has been regulated with this factor for last 3 years already. And when March 6th meeting happened for the negotiation of potential production cuts, immediate production cuts, Russia and Saudi Arabia did not concur on first of all, on necessity of making the production cut on March 6th or around that time, or on the amount of production cuts that has to be agreed, which led to information war. I don't call it price war because price war has been going on since the inception of the OPEC Plus. But the information war started, which was compounded by Saudi Arabia's assertive declarations and actions, such as production discounts for their oil sold in Europe. Just to put it in perspective, the first 2 weeks of March, actually for 2 weeks after the negotiation failed, Russia hasn't been able to sell a single barrel of Urals to European market, which is phenomenal. It's right there. Therefore, it has been supplying the oil through its pipelines. When we say it hasn't been able to sell its oil, on the spot market. Therefore, the situation was exacerbated with this conflict, which brought the prices even further down. And along the road, throughout this period, the crisis, the pandemic, started impacting American economy. And since the first 10 days of March, Trump administration started imposing restrictions and lockdowns, and that led to further decline in the consumption. because America, whether it comes to the car fleet or air transportation, is one of the leading markets in the world. And when industries in the world, and when there are lockdowns, of course, the consumption and goes away, it declines right away. And these all factors and compounded, intertwined, led to the situation where the parties which caused actually this information war and further decline in the market were obliged to come back to the table, the negotiation table, of course, with the help of the Trump administration, with the mediation of Trump administration and International Energy Agency. And they have reached an unprecedented agreement of cutting 9.7 million barrels of the market, plus 5 million commitment. 5 million barrels of the commitment came from non-OPEC plus countries. But what happened last week, this week, showed that it wasn't enough. Although the production cut agreement will be valid from May 1st, it didn't have any impact on the prices. It actually had the reverse impact, and what we saw with the WTI was indicative of the situation. Now, why WTI collapsed and Brent didn't? That's a question that always been asked, and the reason of that is the infrastructural bottlenecking in the United States, which is the American production. Most of the American production is located inland, and WTI benchmark is calculated based on that production, and therefore, since it didn't have any access to the oceans, was not being able to be shipped, it created enormous oversupply, which brought to negative price. For the last 2 days, we've seen a rebound in WTI. It's not negative anymore, which is it's surprising to even mention that as a fact. But now we are in a situation where the market is awaiting the May 1st when the production cuts will be effective, and also there is an expectation of another meeting by OPEC Plus and other signatories to the recent deal, where they will be discussed the need for the further production cuts.
This is really a perfect storm on the market, you could say. And just for listeners, WTI, if I remember correctly, stands for West Texas Intermediary. So it's the blend the U.S. exports. But let's step back here to talk about OPEC Plus in the first place, because Russia's relationship with Saudi Arabia, and we're going to get into some foreign policy here, is particularly interesting. They went from dating back to, 2010 or so, being on opposite sides of the Syrian civil war with pretty diametrically opposed regional interests. Russia traditionally played nicer with Iran, and the U.S. played nicer with Saudi Arabia. This partnership kind of came out of the blue as regional dynamics are shifting. The U.S. is perhaps less interested in the Middle East. So let's talk a little bit about how that partnership came about, and then the pressures that led the partnership to at least temporarily dissolve to get us where we are right now. And what kind of partnership is it? I've heard the term alliance before, which may be strong. Let's kind of go through that list.
Yeah, I think the perfect storm is the perfect word to describe it. The circumstances actually brought Saudi Arabia and Russia together. What happened 4 years ago when the shale oil started supplying the market with additional 5 million barrels of oil. So basically, when the impact of shale oil was difficult to ignore, and that raised the flag for Saudi Arabia, because that was the first time when non-OPEC production surpassed the OPEC production. That meant for Saudi Arabia, the leverage that they have of impacting the prices is under strain, or they may lose it very fast. So that was one reason why Saudi Arabia and Russia found a common ground. We know that it was the first time in the history when the Saudi reigning king visited Russia or Soviet Union, and then there were reciprocal visits by Putin. So that was the first reason why it brought these two rivals in the oil market, because they are the two of three countries which produce more than 10 million barrels, basically produce in double digits. And they were able to do that by disentangling their geopolitical interests or positions, both in Syria, or Iran, or other matters as well. The second reason why Saudi Arabia was encouraged to take the lead in the issue, because the first visit was from the Saudi Arabia, was the JCPOA agreement, which created a necessity for the Saudi Arabia, for the Riyadh, to hedge its interest, because it was shocking for Riyadh, for the kingdom, to see United States and Iran to be in any agreement, for the obvious reasons, of course. So these two factors brought them together, and they have managed to keep their political interests aside from their commercial interests. They have also continued competing for the market share, and this competition was evident in Chinese market, where we see it right now as well. Rosneft and Saudi Aramco, Russia and Saudi Aramco, Saudi Arabia are, 1 month it's Saudi Arabia the largest supplier, another month it's a Russian company, a Russian industry. So there's a competition going on still. So they have managed to put those differences aside and concentrate on OPEC Plus, and actually to maintain the cartel for 3 years throughout these geopolitical storms that happened, and try to expand their partnership in other areas as well. Now, I wouldn't call this alliance or strategic partnership because of differences in their perception of the world, as well as differences of the role, and also competing roles, because Russia is also trying to be a more active regional player in the Middle East and globally as well. And also, given the special relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, I would call it more transactional format. And the experience of last 1 month was indicative of that nature. One of the signals, or one of the indications of how these two powers, or how these two players perceive this relationship was clear when Novak commented Saudi Arabia's behavior after the April 12th deal, after that unprecedented deal. He said that we never expected, it was irrational for Saudi Arabia to act that way. That means that could be interpreted as, when the calculations was made in early March of not supporting any production agreement at that time, and defer the decision making to the end of the month by seeing how the crisis evolved. They didn't expect Saudi Arabia to be so aggressive, subtly and directly in their policy decisions, or by providing discounts, or by threats that will oversupply the market and will overcompete any other country, and our economy is more resilient. That was a shock for Russian leadership. It shows that they were in higher opinion, in my opinion, they were in higher opinion of their relation with Saudi Arabia, and that was a litmus test for their relations. Now, it doesn't mean this partnership is over. However, it's under strain, and the tensions will maintain until the crisis, the pandemic, is there, until there's oversupply in the market, the abundance is growing, and demand is weakening. As long as this situation will remain, the strains on the relations between these two countries will remain as well. From time to time, we see statements made both by Russian side and by Saudi Arabia, subtly mentioning one's advantage over the other, or resilience in competing for the markets, for the lucrative markets.
Deep topic, very fascinating. I guess to continue along that line, You mentioned that Russia and the Saudis were able to put aside their geopolitical differences. Can you talk a bit about Russia's vision for the Middle East, its role there? It seems to me that Russia's tried to play kind of the regional honest broker, which is hard to do anywhere, but especially in the Middle East, you can't really be a friend to everybody. So how does Russia perceive its regional interests?
Well, I think the Russia is implementing the Primakov's doctrine of being active in regionally in hotspots of the world, especially in the Middle East, because Primakov was so obsessed with the Middle East, as well as it was his sphere of authority when he was working in special services in KGB. I think that Russia is implementing that policy of asserting multipolar world, indicating feebleness or weakness of the United States in policing the world, and undermining the perception of the unipolar world. And by doing so, in order to achieve that recognition of being another pole, along with China in their perception, they want to show actions. They want to show success story. And Syria is, I think that's what you alluded to, is one of the examples of it. Or Libya, what we're seeing in Libya, there is a Russian interference there as well, is another example. But it's a very complicated region, geography. So Russia is being very careful. Having said that, it needs to prove its presence in every other region. In order to do so and to prevent further commitment, they are preferring a more limited approach. And that's where the paramilitary groups play in or fit in, the Wagner group, the others. So they're playing a very careful game. They understand that it's a very complicated territory, but at the same time, they want to be known as a success story. And I think what is being projected as a success in Syria, it might not be perceived as a success here in the United States by certain groups. It is definitely perceived as a success in the parts of the Middle East, regardless whether it is a success or not. They have managed to successfully promote the idea, and they're actually being achieving their goals. Saudi Arabia is not the only country that Russia is partnering or Russia is counting on its pivot to the Middle East. UAE is I believe actually is more important than Saudi Arabia in their efforts. And I don't think its relations with Saudi Arabia will or the partnership or whatever they have now will be terminated anytime soon. Of course, it will be depending on how the crisis and the pandemic evolves. But I don't think if the relations between two countries, between Riyadh and Moscow, worsens, that will affect their presence in the region because they have other avenues such as the UAE or Egypt in North Africa or other parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. This plays into a dynamic we've covered in BNB Russia and Ukraine a lot, especially for Russia, of optics mattering more than the facts on the ground oftentimes. That was especially true with the privatization of Rosneft, which wasn't really privatized at all, but gave the image of that. But speaking of Rosneft and transitioning a little bit more to Russia's, not necessarily domestic market, but domestic politics, talk about the interplay between Russia's geopolitical vision here, but also the fact that cost was borne by Russian companies. It's not just Russia cutting production, willy-nilly out of the blue. It's forcing companies like Rosneft, Gazpromneft to make the cuts and then take the hit. In Putin and his team's eyes, is the overall market dynamic more important than those individual companies?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the major factors, the internal dynamics that is being mainly overlooked when the OPEC Plus or any other global energy matter is being discussed. What's happening in Russia, what has been happening throughout their recent independence is the struggle between the state, the central government, and the companies over who gets the control on deciding how to split the revenues, basically a rentier system. In the 90s, the companies were stronger. We had Yukos, we had other companies, Lukoil. After Putin came, he centralized the state's role, actually strengthened the state's role in making these decisions. And now we see after the decade or almost 2 decades of Putin's rule, now we see the companies trying to be more independent as well. And this is happening both wittingly and unwittingly, or deliberately or not. Because what's happening is Rosneft, which is led by Igor Sechin, who comes from Putin's close circle. He used to be his assistant and has the military background or special service background. He's the only major CEO of Russian oil companies. Not only he's the only major CEO, but he's also the CEO of the largest Russian oil company, who doesn't have the energy background or finance background, but he has a good access to the Kremlin, not necessarily to the cabinet of ministers, not necessarily to the prime minister when it's not Putin, but to the Kremlin itself. So there has always been, especially for the last 5-6 years, Sechin has been trying to impact the decisions made by the state in respect to the oil and gas, whether it's tax regime or exemptions from taxes, especially for their projects in Far East, or subsidies to get the more share of the subsidies, as well as to be the winner of the bidding, the tenders that state announces for the prospective oil and gas fields. And the way that Russia's decision was interpreted in global media or in Russian media as well, is that Sechin, who has been vocal against OPEC Plus for the last 2 years for many reasons, he won by persuading Putin to abandon the deal. This could be done now. This notion that Sechin was the culprit could be true. Also, could be something that Putin has always been using. It's basically preparing a fertile ground to announce someone as a scapegoat of a decision if the decision goes wrong, which happened, which we saw. But how Novak explains it, and by the way, the Novak belongs to more. Of course, he's a state minister, he's an energy minister, and he is always his position is to give the state more powers than the companies. Novak said that this wasn't about Sechin or anyone else. It was more about the difference between Saudi Arabia and Russia in perception of the situation associated with the pandemic and how it will affect the prices or demand or consumption. That was his explanation. However, again, the media went and made the scapegoat of Sechin. Putin was never guilty of making any wrong decisions, and the way that Novak explained it, that justified it, was that we were right because we told them to wait until the end of the month and then make a decision. So that was the overall story about the background about Russia's decision on withdraw from the negotiation. But of course, the Rosneft, now that there is a commitment to cut 2.5 million barrels of oil, Rosneft is the one who will get hurt, because Rosneft's production is around 3.6 million barrels. It's the largest in Russia. It's one of the largest in the world as well, and that's only without the Bashneft, which Rosneft owns 57%. If you add Bashneft to it, it's around 3.8 or 4 million barrels. And what's happening right now is the energy ministry is trying to impose. Of course, it's negotiating with these companies, but trying to impose 20% proportional, a 20% cut for every company, including the companies that you have mentioned: Rosneft, Lukoil, Surgutneftgaz, Gazpromneft, Tatneft, and also some independents as well. So if that happens, given that Rosneft produces around 4 million barrels, more than 4 million barrels, Rosneft will have to cut around, I guess, 1 million barrels compared to Lukoil's, let's say, 250,000 barrels, or Surgutneftgaz even lesser than that. So Rosneft will get the hit of having to cut more. The problem with Rosneft or other major Russian companies is that most of the production in Russia comes from the West Siberian fields and a little bit at the Volga-Ural as well. Now, these West Siberian fields, like around the Tyumen, Nizhnovartovsk, these are, for instance, one of the largest is Samatlor field. It's been producing since 1969, almost 50 years ago, I guess, and it's still the largest producer. But the way that they maintain the production numbers, high production numbers, production rates in these fields, is they use what we call extraction recovery techniques. And when you cut, I'm trying not to be too technical here, when you cut the production, it's not just turning off the valve. It means you have to decrease the pressure in the wells. I think I'm being too technical. But if you do that, then you're risking of some of your reserves never being recovered in the future because they remain in the lower horizons of the field. Was I clear? Was it too much?
Yes, I'll take another whack for listeners. So, but I think the issue that Russia's facing geologically is you can't just turn off the oil. It's not like a spigot, like a sink. And by trying to turn it off, Russia is basically shrinking the reserves, shrinking the number of barrels it can get out of these fields.
Exactly. They are risking to not be able to recover those reserves anymore. And the other problem is that since the production in Russia was expected to peak around 2024, the need for investment into the new fields, the necessity makes Russian companies to drill more in order to make more money, to reap the maximum benefit of it. And all these fields the new fields are located in the East Siberian. Just to put in context, the Vankor field, which is a new cluster of fields that Rosneft is trying to sell to Asian buyers, mainly Chinese, Indian, and Japanese companies. They're located 2,000 kilometers northeast of Samatlor field, which is the largest field now. So you have to go further to the permafrost, further to the Arctic and Far East now for Rosneft to produce new fields. That means the production costs grow exponentially. And the real risk for Rosneft is not the risk of losing those reserves that it's producing now, but the risk of losing the future production, because in the conventional oil and gas industry, there's a term called lead period. That means you have to make a decision, final investment decision, on certain day, on like today, for the oil well to produce in 4 or 5 years, in the best scenario, because these are very complicated in terms of the geology, and now in Rosneft's case, in terms of the climate and environment as well. And now Rosneft, with this price environment and with the shock that is going through, the real risk for Rosneft and other major producers in Russia, especially the state-owned companies, of not being able to get the reserves, the financial resources to replenish their reserves by investing in these fields in East Siberia, and also it's also risking of failing in attracting the foreign investment. The investors were already having second thoughts in investing in these projects, even in the normal times. Now they're risking of not getting those investments. And these projects, and the state's position is that we will only provide subsidy if a company attracts certain percentage of the field, or tax exemptions will be contingent to that success. I think the main problem is not of losing those production reserves, but of the risking the future of the oil industry. Because once it goes to decline and Russia is not able to replenish its reserves, and also notwithstanding that Rosneft and other companies are publicly traded companies as well. So, and the success of any oil company is measured by its success in replenishing its reserves, showing that they have found certain amount of reserves and they will invest certain amount of money in the near future to extract those reserves. So I think that's a bigger threat for Russian oil and gas industry than risking like technological problems or technical problems of risking certain reserves, which could be actually a bigger problem, a significant issue as well.
Yeah, and that's in the long term. I mean, Russia, I don't want to say it's as dependent on oil and its budget as it used to be, although that's also partly mathematical. But you can't make oil money if you're not producing oil, and that production is shrinking. That's actually all the time we have. As was clear, there's a lot of moving parts, especially with the oil and gas market and how that plays into geopolitics with Russia. But thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Aaron, and you can follow BMB Russia and Ukraine at the Twitter handle @BearMarketBrief. BMB is a project of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, a nonpartisan think tank in Philadelphia. For more information about this and other initiatives, be sure to visit fpri.org.